Good morning, Guardian! Boy, do we have an exciting show for you today on Adam versus the Man. It is our long-awaited secession panel. Probably first of many. If at first you don't secede, try again. Wah, wah, wah. Come on, I beat you to the sound effects there, CJ. Secession, I know it's kind of a big word, but you might have heard from it if you've been studying American history, because that's how it started. In textbooks, they call it the Declaration of Independence and the Revolutionary War. But what was it? Seceding from the empire. Some of us are so American that we just have to carry on this tradition today. We have a very exciting show, a panel with 5 very exciting guests. We got Marcus Ruiz Evans, president of Yes California, a couple of people working with him on that project, Jason Wright and Sue Hirsch. J.R. Myers, also part of that project from Alaska, and Poka Leanui from Hawaii. So we're going to get into all of our guests and why they are into secession, why they have dedicated their activism to this oh-so-righteous cause. But first, let's check in with Comet Jim Freedom today to kick off the show. Mr. Freedom coming to us from Phoenix, Arizona. Jim, how you doing, brother?
Good morning. How's it going?
Excellent. I'm excited for today's show. Like this is one I'm like there's Reefer Mattis in the comments and 420 Pat Rock. All right, Matt Baxley. Looking forward to this awesome panel today. Y'all are amazing. So Jim, do we have a comment contest perhaps? Like what maybe the best case for secession in a YouTube comment or a super chat can win membership in the Producers Club today. In case it wasn't clear, we are pro-secession.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're looking today, comments, questions, anything on this subject. But I think the best comment advocating for secession today, why it's something that we should latch onto, and this basic concept of peaceful separation from a central political authority or a larger political body to separate as a subsidiary unit and become sovereign. Why is that important? I could talk for 2 hours by myself answering that question, but we are going to get to our panelists eventually. But first, Jim, why don't you tell people what they would win if they have that top comment today?
If you end up with the top comment participating in our contest, you'll win access into our private Telegram Producers Club. That's there's like 30-something people in there now. It's just a group that runs 24/7. We share links. We talk about stuff that's going on in our lives. It's a private group channel as opposed to the public Telegram channel that you can join at t.me /Adam versus the Man. Anybody's welcome to join that. That's a pretty cool campaign. The private chat is where it's at, so you can win access to that. If you don't feel like participating in the contest or waiting until you are lucky enough to be a winner, then you can just go to adamversustheman.com and click on the Patreon link there. You'll see a few different levels of ways to help with Adam in the show: $1, $5, $10, or $50 a month. $10 a month is really where it's at. That'll get you access into that private Patreon Telegram group. So check that out. After that, go back to adamversustheman.com and check out the store that CJ's put together. He's got a bunch of cool stuff there: shirts, laptop sleeves, backpacks, hats, coffee mugs, towels. Really check it out. He's got a lot of really cool items there with the Freedom logo and Adam versus the Man, so you can represent with all kinds of different items. Producers Club members and better patrons always get 15% off and free shipping every order. So check that out. Next, you can go back to the website that has everything, adamversustheman.com. You can check on the Cigar Federation link. That'll take you to cigarfederation.com. Very excellent website for cigars. They have many exotic flavors to choose from. If you use promo code ADAM10, like you see on the screen there, you'll get 10% off of your entire order there. So definitely check that out. Lastly, if you're on Instagram, check out the handle at the Garden of Freedom, and you can see everything that's been going on with Adam up there in Gardenia over the last year or so, and over the next, from here till the rest of time. You can watch it go independent.
Yeah, not to get derailed on that too far, because we are going to come back to this. There are a few different ways of looking at this opportunity of secession, of moving humanity forward and making the world a better place for everyone by creating a political reality that reflects our needs and our values. And it's kind of like there are three different ways I see of doing this. For those of you who know my presidential campaign, take governments apart from the top down. You get to give everybody their stolen stuff back, distribute the assets as best you can. Then there's political separation, where like California falls off into the ocean and everybody waves by and we don't miss them, or Texas into the Gulf. And then there's the bottom up micronation, which is what we're doing here with Gardenia, the Garden of Freedom, where, hey, if you can, on private property, on land that you own, you create out of nothing a new political sovereign unit. But what that gets to, as y'all know from watching Adam versus the Man, is standing up to the man who wants to concentrate, consolidate power and money in the hands of the few, and saying, no, we're not going to be forced into your evil system anymore, one way or another. So get your comments ready, get your questions ready. Best advocacy for secession in a comment and top super chat today.
I like this one. Let's start with one real quick. Healthy disrespect for authority. He says, reason for secession. It's SE, I think it is, right? Secession. This is succession, but whatever. The federal government has no interest in balancing the budget. If they can't meet their financial obligations, they need to be closed, assets sold to pay their own bills.
Well, if I may, I would just say that what that reveals is that the purpose of the federal government is to force you into an economic system that's designed to rip you off, not to be. I mean, they're defying normal economic sustainability principles with coercion. It doesn't matter if they're in debt. It doesn't matter if the budget's not balanced. They can keep stealing from you by printing more money, by borrowing more money, by taxing you. So it doesn't matter. But that is one good motivator, I should say, for separation. People are seeing that the same way the founders of this country said, screw you to King George. We don't want to be a part of your evil empire anymore. More and more Americans are getting ready to say that to the feds, or the concept of the federal government. And I'd like to think in this day and age, in a more peaceful, political, rational, calm, and non-confrontational way, simply peaceful separation. And that's definitely the spirit in which Yes California and the Calexit movement is being conducted. So let's go to our first guest. Marcus Ruiz Evans is the president of Yes California. And there's an obvious international tie-in here, if you didn't notice. CJ, before we get into Marcus, please get the website up on screen here, because this is relevant for Jason and Sue's intro as well here. That they've basically very cleverly borrowed the branding of Yes Scotland, and there are a lot of different international parallels and comparisons here. But Marcus Ruiz Evans has been a part of this cause for years. It has been the centerpiece of his activism. He has been involved with different groups. And you probably know him as a past guest several times over here on Adam versus the Man. Also as the president of Yes California. He has organized organization around this with a sort of a large volunteer board of directors model. And I'm very excited to have recently accepted an appointment to the Calexit Congress by President Marcus Ruiz Evans. And it's really exciting to see how this group is now getting to the next level. I don't let my guests talk on the show. I just tell my audience how awesome you are while you sit there and smile. I don't know if you've noticed that pattern yet, Marcus, but go ahead, Marcus. I mean, anything you want to say about this? And before we get to our other guests, at least tell us, how did you get involved with this in the first place?
I don't really want to talk, man. You're doing a much better job. So just keep selling it. Thank you for joining the Calexit Congress. Yes, California is the oldest and largest of all the Calexit groups. We actually got started in 2014, years before Trump, when Obama was around. And we never changed our talking points through the Barack or Donald administrations. That's usually a strange point for a lot of the media. They want to hear that this was just purely a reaction to Trump, and we're all super liberals. Well, we are. This is kind of a lefty coast, but not everybody here is a super liberal. We actually have some Trump voters in our organization. They support California values. And while we are majority liberal, we want to be open to conservatives in America to work with us. And that's why we were very pleased that you, Adam, and also Daniel Rice, who's the
Yes.
Texas Nationalist Movement ambassador, also accepted appointments to our Congress. Neither of you are Californians. But our point at Yes California was this. You cannot be a serious secession organization if you don't actually have a plan to achieve this. And you cannot say that you're dedicated to peaceful secession if you're not planning to do it by the law. A lot of secessionists say, I want secession. Well, what's your legal plan to do that? Well, I don't know. Well, then you really shouldn't be taken seriously as peaceful. There's only one peaceful way to do this, and there's only one legal way to do that. That's under Texas versus White, or the amendment process. Somewhere between 25 to 35 states have to say it's okay for you to go. Now, at Yes California, we argue for Texas versus White, which, looking at Erwin Chemerinsky, one of the top constitutional scholars here, says about 25 states. If you want to go amendments, it's 35. But the point is this. 35 states to 25 states already are really conservative, and they don't like California. They don't like us clogging up the laws in Congress. They don't like our legislators in Congress saying things that seem batty crazy to them. And they don't like Californians moving to their state and changing everything the way that they are here. They don't like that. And so what we're saying is, why don't we peacefully divorce? Why don't you vote us out and we'll leave? But nobody can take us seriously at that unless we show ourselves as the liberals who will not yell and scream and bite your head off to have a conversation. And the other thing we learned is that conservatives in America are not dummies. They will watch how you treat conservatives in California. And if you can't even talk to conservatives in California, they don't really believe you're willing to talk to conservatives outside of California. And so we at Yes California have done something very different from a lot of the other CalExit organizations. We've said we're fully committed to a peaceful path, which is a legal path, which means a vote, which means you have better make contact with those conservatives, which means you have better treat conservatives here in California with at least some basic fairness. I can't tell you the amount of trash talk we receive from fellow Californians for doing that, but we're committed. We're not backing down. You are an example of the success of that, and the Texas Nationalist Movement also agreeing to a post, and 43 other people is success. Thank you. Check us out at Yes California and consider joining the CalExit Congress.
Yeah, Marcus, there's so much I want to respond to in that we're going to come back to in today's show. But first, I'm still a Cali boy at heart, born and raised San Francisco, Bay Area. I moved to Arizona to get away from the California state government primarily, and I have made the pledge. By the way, legally as a voter, I'm still a Californian because as a felon, I'm not allowed to vote in Arizona. So I am a Kings County, California voter who signed the Governor Newsom recall petition, and
You a bad boy.
I have pledged that if California secedes, I should say, when California secedes, I'll move back. I'll set up another homestead. I mean, if something that historically monumental happens, because California would be the first domino potentially in a new wave of independence movements. And I think if California goes independent, I could secede in New Gardenia just as well. There's so much about this legal political process that I want to get into. We're going to have to come back to. Marcus, thank you for everything you do in this organization and bringing people together and the commitment. I'm not so sure about the commitment to legal so much as lawful and peaceful, but I definitely respect that line that you have drawn, and strategically, organizationally, I wholeheartedly support that, because this is what you are raising here is the ultimate threat to the man. The man depends on you submitting and staying next to him and working for him, and you're saying we're going to peacefully walk away. And if you give them any hint of confrontation, of escalation, of violence, they know how to deal with you. Like John Lennon said, you're done. Nonviolence and humor, that's the only thing they can't handle. And keeping that spirit is so important for this movement. So Marcus, thank you for embodying that in your activism. All right, so let's go to Jason Wright next. Jason, Sean Richard Wright, also born and raised in California, about to turn 35, been a staunch supporter of the right to self-determination, social justice, smart reforms, better serving the people. Calls himself a humanitarian, an activist, an artist, free thinking individual. And as part of this Cal Exit Congress, also showing that he's dedicated to finding ways to get to the deeper issues. And that's, something that I think is so critical about secession. There's no beating around the bush. There's no bullshitting. Well, we're going to tinker with this. Well, please be nicer to us this way. It's like, nah, you know what? Critically, it doesn't add up. We're out of here. So Jason is the Bay Area regional coordinator for the Cal Exit movement. So you have to deal with all of those screaming, bite your head off San Francisco liberals and get them to calm down enough to do meaningful activism. That's your job in this, Jason?
Yeah, the ones that do try to bite my head off, I have to pull the tortoise move and tuck back into my shell real quick. But there are actually a lot of people who are positively responsive to the movement. Just here in the Bay, I've been working on this area for the last 5 years now, and 4 years ago, there was a significant amount of support here in the Bay. Now, it's not as much of overt support. However, one would be hard-pressed to find someone in this area who thinks that secession is totally outright unreasonable.
Yeah.
The ones who maybe don't agree that we need it right now, at least usually aren't saying, no, you're insane for thinking this.
Yeah. Do you think there's a bit of a swing?
Well, I could see why.
Do you think there's a sway or a swing in public opinion around Biden taking office there?
Well, that was interesting because some of us with Yes California, we had predicted that Trump would be the president after the last one, and we were right. And then we predicted again that he would probably win because, the amount of, back and forth, the dang near 50-50 split, right? Usually when it's like that, like what we saw with Hillary Clinton, when it's kind of close, whoever the establishment decides to go with is the one that we're stuck with.
Yeah.
That's why we figured that we would be under Trump again. And we're not, but things have not really changed at all. At all.
Yeah,
we're seeing that.
Well, like Marcus has said, and I think for those of us who are intellectually and ethically in our activism committed to the concept of secession, we have to look at the federal government differently. And when the federal, it's not, oh, Trump was daddy, now Biden's daddy, and now there's a new lover here, and we can be, oh, we'll hope that they treat us well. It's more like the federal government, this abusive institution that I try to hesitate to over anthropomorphize, but it's instead of, it's not, hey, there's a new leader, it's there's a new front man, there's a new mask, there's a new flavor of bullshit coming out of the federal government. And once you get that, then it doesn't matter, which mask the feds are wearing now. And I would hope that even though I know most of California, I mean, I am from California, college in California. And by the way, Marcus, when you said California values, and you've said it a couple times in the last couple of conference calls, I was always like, you don't use that term publicly because the rest of the country fucking hates California values, right? But there is a legitimate, beautiful spirit of California values that people confuse with the California state government, which the people of California are as much a victim of as the American people are a victim of the federal government. And so in California, those values get there's California is so prosperous, so rich in natural resources and human resources and culture and potential, and as the world's 7th largest economy, separate from the U.S., there's no reason to not celebrate those positive things, even by, you know, libertarian standards that might lead people to bigger government, that are positive values in California of true progressiveness, of progression, not re-entrenching big government, but rethinking things. So, you know, Jason, I hope that's part of what you're tapping into out of my old stomping grounds in the Bay. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That is it exactly.
All right. I hope you're able to pull some of the Silicon Valley innovation resources on board here. So, healthy disrespect for authority comments. So if Cali exits, will 90 proof Nancy be the new Cali dictator? Okay. We'll come back to the fantasy politics California games after we introduce the rest of our panelists. Up next, Sue Hirsch, also coming from California, involved with the Cal Exit campaign, part of the Cal Exit Congress, pushing for peaceful separation for California since 2015. I have that same t-shirt. Yes, Marcus has given me 2 of them. So 2015, that's a decent amount of time to put into a cause and activism. She describes herself as having grown up as an indoctrinated Democrat, helped her parents campaign for congressional candidates. That's a great background to have your parents give you that sense of civic engagement. She's been a massage therapist for 20 years, health coach, founder of Kotati, Organized Against Racism, and homemaker, has become more cognizant of the fact that democracy has never been a true oh my gosh, we're not gonna debate what rule by the people means for 2 hours. We're gonna stay focused on, but yes, democracy, very, very loaded term. She's been an advocate for marginalized portions of the population, which, you know, while libertarians might chafe at government officials saying that really is a beautiful thing that we want to support and make sure that we have a more inclusive society that recognizes the rights of every human being. So she says she knows that the U.S. will never change because people in power don't voluntarily share power, and all Americans deserve better, and California is singularly positioned to be able to do better for her own people and for the world. Sue, welcome to the show.
Yeah, and so that we sort of have a chance of staying on topic with what you guys have been talking about, let me add on to a couple of comments you made. The person who brought me to the idea of California secession was actually Marcus Ruiz Evans, and he found me online when I got so angry that Trump had won the election, and I got absolutely sick of the U.S. at that point, and started to realize what a farce the U.S. democracy system was. And Marcus had written a book called California's Next Century and California's Next Century 2.0. Those are 2 different books, excuse me. And if you haven't read them yet, you really should. And he also introduced me to some other people who have since gone off and, as he encouraged them to, began their own projects to bring about a secession. And one of them was Claire Hedin, and she has now gone off to do her own thing to help bring about sort of a secession through what she calls right relationships. And then there are other people who are in a group called Return California, which is supported by Calexit and Yes California, and they are a project or a movement that is geared toward returning land to its original owners. And a lot of people don't understand that, and they're afraid that that would mean, oh, I'd have to move out of my house and give up everything. And no, that's not what it means, but we won't go into that right now, because I wanted to address Jason's comment.
Sue, if I may on that, it's actually a very relevant issue, because a lot of people are afraid of this because there is a lot of anger that motivates this, and I'm glad you've been kind of upfront about that motivation, and it's beautiful, like just perfect follow up to what we said about the mask. It's like you go from I hate this president to I hate this mask that the federal government is wearing right now, and that's that's a beautiful
But
process to go through.
they've been wearing the mask for centuries. The Constitution started out being a farce because not everybody in America had those rights that were delineated in the Constitution.
Yeah, right.
Women did not
White
have the right
landowning
to
males.
vote. Black people did not have the right to vote. Native Americans did not have the right to vote or to own land. They were mass murdered when we, from the time we started colonizing. Um, and so the whole Constitution itself was a complete farce.
Oh yes. Oh, don't worry. My audience is familiar with the fact that this is an illegitimate constitution and the product of a coup against the Articles of Confederation. But that's another rabbit hole for another show.
I
Sue,
figured I figured they were, so I kind of also wanted to comment on Jason's earlier comment because he was so right that it's really just the same narrative now, but with different players. And the government is still very abusive, as you said, Adam. That's a really great word for it. They're still taking our taxes without really representing what's in our best interest, using them for what's in our best interest. They're still drilling in California's land and stealing California's precious natural resources for pennies on the dollar or nothing at all. Just look at where Matt Owen lives in Los Angeles, where there's Strawberry Creek, and Nestle is stealing out of that with the and the government is condoning it. They're doing it with the government's blessing, and they're still not protecting the people. They're still allowing for Native American women to go missing and to be, kidnapped and killed without representing them or showing those numbers, those enormous numbers and statistics of Native American women who go missing and just get raped and killed all the time.
the
And
history of forced sterilization.
yeah, they just report it in the headlines so that it will fly under the radar of the American populace. And about the phrase California values that Marcus used twice now, that is an awesome phrase to use because it brings Californians together. And at the same time, it might just make people in other states who don't like the idea of California values, it might get them to vote us off the island.
Well, it's a vague phrase, California values, but it invokes for everybody a different positive vision. If you have any positive inclination or association with California, it's a positive celebration of the ethos, the spirit that makes California unique. But Sue, what I want to address before we get to our other panelists here is this idea of the land and taking back the land. And this is very, where there's so much unoccupied land being controlled and manipulated for resource extraction.
It's called federal land, and the thing is that the entirety of the land used to belong to the Native Americans here, and they actually want it back. We went to listening roundtables.
We're gonna get into this because this is, possession is 9/10 of the law. Did they own everything? Do we respect that you live where you live now and you have a home and a life? And I think there's this weird sort of like white guilt when people hear, wait, Native Americans might take back the land. Oh shit, I think I live on land that was stolen. Are they coming for me? It's like, no. Nobody's talking about that. And it came up with our platform to dissolve the federal government and say, we are going to give Native American tribes the opportunity to reclaim any land that's been stolen or taken away in treaties that's not developed for individual personal use. There's never, it's sort of in all of this, there is a respect that the ultimate minority is the individual, and that if California has a right to secede, hypothetically, so do you as an individual on land that you own and you occupy legitimately. So with that being said, we go to Alaska. J.R. Myers joins us, currently the national chair of the Life and Liberty Party. He was their 2020 nominee. on the ballot in Arkansas, also chairman of the Alaska Constitution Party, former vice chair of the Alaskan Independence Party. And in Alaska, obviously, like we're going to our next guest with Hawaii, no surprise, there is a very distinct history of calling for independence in Alaska, to the point that you're so organized, you're a party now. JR, welcome to the show. How you doing, brother?
Hi, Adam. It's nice to see you again. I think we met in Chicago for the Free and Equal debates.
Yes.
Yes. That seems like so long ago, right before the pandemic hit and everything changed. But, so actually, I'm in Cutbank, Montana right now. I do maintain my ties with Alaska, Montana and Alaska, and I am still involved. I am the chairman of the Alaska Constitution Party still.
Wait, Montana and what is it about Montana and Alaska? Really cold places that human beings aren't supposed to live?
Well, we have lots of wide open spaces, so we are free from prying bureaucrats as much as you can be geographically, I guess you could say. Now they have drones and everything, but whatever. But the winters also help keep the people, separate. That's our social distancing is 50 below zero.
Yeah, no, I love it, JR. I certainly appreciate that. As someone who lives down 3 miles of private dirt road, there's an interesting dichotomy here between a state like California with dense population centers, an overgrown state government, distinct culture, as opposed to perhaps Montana or Alaska, where you have pockets of populations, but it's much more dispersed, and it's already much more oriented towards an independent, self-reliant lifestyle. How do you see those two ideas relating between, say, Montana and Alaska type communities, or like here in
Right.
super rural Arizona versus, oh crap, it's California, it's LA and San Diego and San Francisco and Sacramento, and they're going to separate?
I just wanted to say, right now I live just next to the Blackfeet Reservation, so we have all the issues of the missing indigenous women and the sovereignty issues and all of it going on, the meth and all of it. But as far as the connections between like Montana, Alaska, California, even Hawaii, as part of this movement, what I've come to learn, it's a very much we've been ill-educated or misdirected, I guess you could say, by the public education system. And the more you're in this movement, the more you learn. And I learned that the entry of California into the Union as a state had eerie parallels to the entry of Alaska and the entry of Hawaii and then some other states, which it was kind of an imperialistic model. And it wasn't really fair. It didn't really follow the rule of law. And so I'm a big constitutionalist and believe in the rule of law. But when the government itself is violating the rule of law and becomes the biggest threat to the rule of law, then what do, right? So that leads to voter integrity, election integrity, self-determination. How are those things related? When the government no longer respects the Constitution or the law, the people have a right to self-determination. That's how this nation was founded to begin with. So if we deny that to any jurisdiction, then we're denying the founding of this nation, and we're trying to be revisionist historians. So, get on with the program, America, right?
So like we can turn that, like I like this branding. We're so American, we have to declare our independence from America. We're that gosh darn American. But I think, if you want to use this in a sort of defensive way, it might be more effective, as you're suggesting there, JR. Wait, you oppose secession? Why are you un-American? Why do you hate America? Because America isn't the borders, the institution, the circumstance of history. And anybody who says America is something special isn't referring to the lines drawn on a map by war and history and circumstance, but by this idea that this country was born in, of saying we're gonna walk away, and we'll fight if we have to, although I don't think we have to in this day and age, but we're gonna walk away. And if you oppose us, you're taking a position against freedom. All right, so with that, you mentioned the colonization of the empire of the United States federal government. And nowhere is there a more underreported story on that imperial expansionism than in Hawaii. And you learn about the Trail of Tears, and you learn about the first Thanksgiving and the Indian Wars or the French Indian Wars and things like that. But the story of the conquest of Hawaii is the most undertold, embarrassing story in American history. And if you don't know, our next guest can at least fill you in on why that might motivate Hawaii to be independent again. Poka Lenui, I hope that's close enough to the correct pronunciation there. Poka has been in the forefront of the promotion for Hawaii independence from the United States for years, and he has taken this to the community there, to the courts, and to international tribunals. And Hawaii really does present itself as a unique opportunity this way to go before international courts and say, the U.S. federal government kind of screwed up here. Absolute clear-cut case, and it's great that Poka, he's still an attorney in Hawaii and is active as an attorney activist. But his position on Hawaii is that right now it is in a state of colonization and entitled to decolonization. And you apply international law and you go, oh yeah, we still do colonies, we still do empires like this. I don't think so. Poka, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us and for representing what might be really one of the most beautiful and righteous causes in the general cause of secession.
Yes, aloha everyone. Thank you very much for allowing me to join you in this very important conference. I think I should lead off by saying that Hawaii's situation is indeed somewhat different, and yet it crosses over many of the experiences of the rest of you folks. The closest would be the situation in Alaska. But to move back into the Hawaii experience, Hawaii had been an independent nation recognized by the international community. We had treaties and executive agreements with almost every nation in the world. We had at least 5 treaties with the United States. We were a member of the first international organization, the Universal Postal Union. Had there been a United Nations at that time, we would surely have been a member of that United Nations.
Yeah.
However, in about 1890s, the 1890s, the Americans began to plot. And when I say the Americans, I really should be more specific as to certain individuals who were supported by an economic interest that came out of the Republican Party. And they were saying, Hawaii is a fruit in the Pacific, just ready to be plucked. And if we can take Hawaii, then we can expand further into the Pacific and eventually reach the Asian markets. So what we need to do is establish ourselves in Hawaii. And they began a plot between officials in the American government, the representative of the Secretary of the Secretary of State. He was actually the Minister Plenipotentiary, the all-powerful American minister in Hawaii, who had control of all the American military forces in Hawaii. And they teamed up with some economic interests in Hawaii, basically the sugar growers.
Yeah.
The sugar interests wanted to be able to sell their sugar into the United States without having to pay a foreign tariff, because every penny in tariff per pound of sugar meant a penny taken out of their profits. On the other hand, the U.S. military wanted to establish a base at Pearl Harbor from which they could project themselves further into the Pacific.
Yep.
So generally, those were the major interests that were occurring or conflicting in Hawaii against the independence of Hawaii. There was also a lot of racism and a lot of sexism. We were led by Queen Liliuokalani, very, very intelligent person, spoke different languages, was able to write songs and books in English as well as in the Hawaiian. And so there was that prejudice of she being a woman of color. And she being able to lead a nation which was really in advance of other nations. For example, our literacy rate in Hawaii was the highest in the world. And yet we had just come out of the so-called Stone Age a few generations before that. Our technical development in Hawaii, we had streetcars, we had electricity, we had telephone before the White House had theirs in their capital. We had it at our Iolani Palace. So we were not just a backward, stupid people. We were well educated,
Yeah.
and we knew where we wanted to go. But the idea of the right of people to govern themselves, of self-determination, somehow didn't apply to those of different colors.
Mm-hmm.
Those Americans in 1893 invaded Hawaii and simply overthrew the government. They went through some machination of creating a straw government to pretend that this would be the legitimate government, which would then give Hawaii to the United States. But that was seen through when President Cleveland got into office. And he said, no, none of that has been overthrown
Oh,
illegitimately. And so I will not admit Hawaii to the United States as far as I am president. So you have this back and forth going on between Harrison, Cleveland, and then McKinley comes in, the Republican. And what they try to do is get a treaty of cession past the United States Congress. A treaty is signed. They submit the treaty to the Senate of the United States. The U.S. Constitution says that all treaties must be approved by 2/3 of those present in the Senate. They try again and again and again, and they cannot get the 2/3 of the Senate to agree because they have found out what has happened in Hawaii. So what happens is that you have a representative from the House of Representatives who introduces a resolution, a joint resolution, arguing essentially that we can circumvent the U.S. Constitution by saying that, well, if we have the House of Representatives and the Senate pass a resolution by both houses passing it, then we need not have 2/3 of the U.S. Senate to agree with it.
okay.
And so, joint resolution, they pass the resolution for the Treaty of Annexation. Once they do it that way, circumventing the U.S. Constitution, they grab Hawaii and they make Hawaii a territory.
Yeah.
1945, 1946 comes around, the United States joins the United Nations, in fact, formed basically in California, in San Francisco. And in the Charter of the United Nations, it says that all areas that are non-self-governing, and for the United States, they appoint, or the United States submits that these are the areas that are non-self-government and therefore are entitled to self-government. And they include Hawaii, they include Alaska, Guam, not the Philippines, Guam. There are several other areas that I don't remember immediately.
So, well, poke, if I may, just to give people the big numbers that to me are, I mean, mind-boggling that this is written out of American history. What was the native population in Hawaii before colonization and post-colonization? You look at that number and you go, that's a genocide.
Yes, the percentage was about 80% of Native Hawaiians, or
Yeah.
part Native Hawaiians, and then the other 20% were foreigners, and of that, a smaller amount being American foreigners. And so part of the process of the Americanization of Hawaii was that they, whether you liked it or not, they made everyone in Hawaii who were Hawaiian nationals now U.S. citizens. And then they started controlling the immigration system in Hawaii and to transmigrate American citizens and foreigners who came here as Americans or trying to live in the United States as a territory at that time. And so the transmigration process change the basic population in Hawaii so that today the Hawaiian nationals are outnumbered by the foreigners or the immigrant population. But what is
no, it's Hawaii also now represents a very challenging situation for the principles of secession to say, well, if it was the white people and the American feds that came in and did this, do we have to ask their descendants to leave? And it's like, well, now as a result of this unfortunate history, you have a new community there that is a much larger conglomerate. And there certainly needs to be a recognition in this process of the unique persecution of the Hawaiian natives throughout this whole thing. One of the things that struck me when I was in Hawaii recently, aside from being struck by COVID, no, I was struck by the fact that sugar isn't really is a fading production in Hawaii, that it's shifting more towards to other locations around the world, that Hawaii is not the sugar producer it used to be. And there's an incredible historic irony there where the feds, the corporate interests went and sort of took over Hawaii primarily for this sugar exploitation. And now it's not even a thing, and it's more tourism. And with us, like, we had to go do the COVID tests and get out there, my wife and I, for our honeymoon about a month ago in Hawaii. And it seems like Hawaii would benefit so much from being able to control its own standards of tourism. But then there's a bunch of people going, wait a second, I'm going to need a passport to go to Hawaii now? How's that going to work? It seems like the tourism is a more overriding motivator now, yeah?
Well, that's true. It is the main or the second main economic force. Not today because of COVID-19. Actually, it's the military. The military in Hawaii, the U.S. military, controls approximately 1/3 of all of the land in Hawaii, and that was taken during that secession. And so from the American side, they want to hang on to Hawaii because it's the most nuclearized area in the world. It controls, through Camp Smith, all of the military throughout the Pacific and throughout Asia.
What you have in Hawaii, I think when you say decolonization, it really is the most sympathetic cause and in a way to get, like, most people don't think like us. And I want to point this out to appreciate this panel and, you know, all of our fellow activists who are involved like this, is that we look to principles, we look to ethics, we look to how to make the world a better place. Most people are looking at relatively shallow, immediate interests. Does this put food on the table for my family? Is the government wearing a mask that I like? So, Marcus, I want to bring it back to you here. I have this poll, and this is from September of last year, because a lot of Americans were looking at the presidential race going, well, according to this poll, nearly 40% of likely voters would support state secession if their candidate loses. If their candidate wins, hey, the mask, we're forcing our ideas on others, then it's okay. But if others' ideas are being forced on us, then we're out of here. Marcus, what do you think is you know, how does this relate to the work of CalExit, but also the global secession movement, if you will? How do we take this temporary or superficial sentiment against government and turn it into a more principled look to secession?
Thank you. I'd like to take 1 minute to do a couple housekeeping things, and then I'll answer it. I'm sorry, Adam. I got about 7 minutes, and I'm going to get asked.
Sure.
So let me just get this out. Independent California is a separate organization. Yes, California. I said it. Number two, yes, California is the only one of all the CalExit organizations that's actually formally backed Return California. We started the idea. We went on television saying the idea. We took a lot of trash from fellow California liberals. We've also taken a lot of criticism from other people in the CalExit movement who aren't in yes for saying all federal land should be returned as much as possible as practical to the indigenous. Now, if they choose they don't want to manage it all, they want to hand it back, or they want to do some sort of joint management or stewardship, fine, but there should be a vote for them. Yes, California is the only group to formally back that as an organization. Now, while other people are saying they love it, no other group but Yes, California has actually had the, whatever you call it, cojones, to actually, yes, we formally, fully back this. We are the only one in the last 3 years. Now, maybe recently someone has, but in the last 3 years, beginning. Additionally, Yes, California views also that California was illegally taken, similar to the way that Hawaii was. Now, I'm not asking people to back that up. I had legal scholars look into this, but California was an independent nation from 1836 to 1846, according to Kerry McWilliams, who's the top historian of all California history. I dare anyone to challenge him on that. Secondly, California and Hawaii was taken around the same time of Manifest Destiny. Additionally, the indigenous people were not white people, and they were gunned down and told what to do, with white people imported in for votes. So if you look at California and Hawaii, roughly the same time frame, roughly the exact same process, roughly the same propaganda at the same time. But to get to your question, the point is this. Why is Scotland talking about independence? Why is Biafra? Why is Anglophone region it's another African area? Why is parts of Latin America? Why is New Caledonia? Why is Greenland? Why is California? Why is Texas? Why is New York State? Why is Ontario? Why is Quebec? Why is Alberta? Because they could financially survive on their own. That's the answer. If you know that you can financially survive on your own, what teenager makes more money than mom and dad combined and love coming home and being told how you live, when you going to do, who you going to have people over, if you want to stay over, go out late? No one. No adult likes that. And so what happens, I think, is that there's certain regions who realize we don't actually need you. Like, we don't. We don't actually need you. We could actually do it on our own. We don't actually need you at all. Other people can't say that. And so I'm not trying to pick on, but there's other secession movements that have been around for years and have gone nowhere. I mean, they've had some people, but they can't really get bigger because the argument of could we financially survive on our own isn't there. If you can pay the bills, people are taking this seriously. It's not just an America thing, it's a global thing. Look at all the regions pushing for secession right now. We can financially make it. We're the teenager living with mom and dad telling us what to do, and we frankly don't need you telling us what to do. We don't want to live under your rules, and we frankly make more money and don't need you.
You know, I'm tempted, Marcus, I gotta say, I'm tempted to challenge this argument of, well, you can only secede if you're financially independent or sustainable as your current unit. But yeah, the objection that people raise is you can reveal how silly it is because of how big these subsidiary government institutions have become. There's no way the California state government, if you said you're sovereign now, would like, oh my God, it would fall apart.
No, I'm just saying globally, if you're going, why are people in America talking about secession now? It's not independent from global secession movements. All humans are connected, especially with the internet and social media right now. There's something going on with the mind of people, whether it's real or not, where people have figured out, because we're so connected, I don't need you to argue for my trade benefits. Look at Scotland. I don't need you, England, to argue for my trade benefits. I don't need you at the UN. I can go to the EU, the UN by myself, virtually. I don't need you for military support. I could join this group. So because you go back to the 1950s, we didn't have internet. Things were slower. You really needed a larger conglomerate to argue and provide a certain amount of civil services for you as a government to function. Don't need that no more. This thing called the internet and social media ripped all that apart. So the games changed and people realized I can go alone. I'll have to leave it there and take. Sorry.
Thank you, Marcus. Yeah, thank you for all your help putting this together. I want to go to JR for the next question because I've got another survey link up here to refer to. This is actually from Mises.org, Mises Institute. Reuters poll shows Hispanics support secession more than the general population. Obviously, there are issues here with community that intersect geography, ethnicity, culture, and heritage. And in Alaska, with the significant native population and a unique history there, somewhat paralleling that of Hawaii, do you think that provides a certain motivation for secession? And does this mean that I kind of see this like, all right, California versus Alaska versus Hawaii, cage match to see who can secede first? Who can harness the superficial motivations of their population most effectively to see a principled answer to what we're experiencing? JR, how do you think that sort of ethnic and community identity relates to supporting secession? By the way, going to go to Polka next on this, because I talked to some Native Hawaiians when I was there who were not in favor of Hawaiian secession. So, JR, first in Alaska.
With the Alaskan Independence Party, a lot of the voters who are registered there, which it is the third largest party in Alaska, and a large part of the voter base is Alaska Native, they definitely felt that they weren't part, most of them that I've spoken to, that they weren't part of the process. The Alaska Natives were not allowed to vote for statehood. Again, the military and their dependents were shipped in and allowed to vote and actually encouraged to vote. And so it was a very lopsided situation. And there's still a great deal of discrimination towards Alaska Natives in different ways. And the missing Indigenous women problem is just as great in Alaska as it is here in the lower 48. So there's an ethnic component definitely to this. But I don't see it particularly as a racial or ethnic or cultural in its entirety. I prefer to think of it as a rule of law issue, and the equality before the law, justice, due process, all of that. And so that's why I support the Constitution, because I believe that affords those rights to the minorities. So we're losing something by that.
Yeah, guys, what we keep coming back to, what all of you keep on saying over and over and over again, basically, is that everything spins or orbits around the concept of capitalism, because America has always been very capitalistic, very much about the bottom line, and that has always come before people. Profit has always come before people. And so what we do if we want to begin a soft secession is maybe one place to really begin that is with a break from capitalism. And
so without getting into, again, big potential derailment there, but I do want to recognize and acknowledge the significance of what you said there. Obviously, some of us have different definitions of capitalism, but what you're pointing out is the viciousness of the way the American economic system has functioned. I don't think that's in any kind of dispute. We can ascribe different ideological systems to it, but certainly when we look at what's happened in Hawaii as an example of American corporatism, you want to put that under your definition of capitalism. I can respect that. But that there are corporations that have used government to do violence against native populations in order to carry out this colonial policy. Yeah, absolutely, without dispute. And rethinking that consolidation of economic power is critical to this. But I want to go to Polka next on this count for the sentiment of Native Hawaiian. And maybe this can illuminate a little bit about how we relate to native populations in Alaska and in California, or other minority populations. Even like this poll says, Hispanics support secession more than the general population. Not really surprising, but as a white dude looking at the other white dudes oppressing all the colored people, I would say, hey, how come y'all don't reject this system more enthusiastically? It is so frustrating to me to see minorities, and I hate to sound like I'm trying to impose my judgment or values on minorities, but to say or other minorities, but to say hey, how do you not want to stand up to this evil system? How is it that so many have been, like us as a whole, suckered psychologically into this? So Polka, in Hawaii, is the native how behind secession is the native population?
First, I think you need to separate a different approach. Many of you from California and from other American states see issues between races. And so you separate Native Hawaiians, Native Californians, or Hispanics and others. Hawaii is a different situation. Hawaii sees people who have been integrated into Hawaii. Hawaii started the integration process as early as the development of our nation, in which we accepted whites, we accepted blacks, we accepted many people as Hawaiian nationals, as the locals. So what has happened is that you see a transition between even the migrant population from America, from Japan, from China, from other places, coming to Hawaii. And as they are raised in Hawaii, as the generations move in Hawaii, they begin to identify themselves as Hawaiian nationals, as locals. So when you speak with an individual who is of Hawaiian ancestry, but who have gone through the American process of colonization, we have gone through the American schools, we have learned the American history, we are told nothing about our own history. So what you're really doing is you change the mindset. If you pick a person who is of the Native Hawaiian race and you ask him about these things, he may be an Americanized person who is not familiar with the arguments for decolonization, not familiar with even the history. In 1970, 1972, 1974, when I started bringing these issues out before the courts, even the courts, the judges were not familiar with American history. And so we began a process of education in Hawaii. And that process has continued. So it's a continuing socialization, re-education process. So you cannot take a person at a moment in time and ask, how do you feel about independence? My father could not understand what I was talking about, and yet I was court-martialed in the American process, and he just couldn't understand how could my son serving in the U.S. military get court-martialed, because he went through a social process. He became so Americanized. The mindset is what we need to work at, to say that this is not a racial thing. This is not a division between the natives and the non-natives. We are talking about some other principles. What is the essential principle that we are looking at? Well, we have been denied our historical rights, just like Alaska has been. And later on, as you look at the process of decolonization, where the Alaskans were not permitted, or the native people were not permitted to participate in self-determination, and yet all military in Alaska was invited to vote and in fact paid to participate in that so-called statehood vote. Hawaii was treated just as well, same questions placed. We were not given an opportunity for independence or for free association. The only question was, do you want to be a state or not? If you're not, you remain a territory. So they screwed us over and over and over, and these were the standards in the international community. So that's where Hawaii and Alaska falls in line in terms of the right to decolonization. So Hawaii has a historical right. Alaska has sort of a historical right, but not really being independent. They were stolen by the Russians, who made the claim that they own certain trading places. And when they sold the trading spots, the United States grabbed it and says, we own all of Alaska. So there's a different but very interesting history. And I don't think the native Alaskans that I've spoken with want to get rid of all immigrants, but they want a fair share of the control within Alaska.
Boca, there's one other important difference between Hawaii and Alaska, and it's that Hawaii is a place that rational people actually want to live. So, as opposed to this giant, unclaimed, unoccupied landmass. No, sorry,
have you ever been to Alaska, Adam? Come on now.
It's
up there too.
We had a particularly brutal winter here, even in the mountains of Arizona this year. And for the first time, I'm like taking showers, scrubbing myself with the snow outside, going, this is nothing. But Sue, I want to turn it back to you for a second here, because while Hawaii has this, distinct ethnic, cultural colonization history, and with Alaska, sort of similar. Whereas, in California, it's much more of a conglomerate, culturally, ethnically, historically, community-wise. And what Polka said there really was so beautiful. At least this element that I pulled out of it, which was that all of this talk about secession, while it's motivated by history, by economic circumstances, by prior wars, by conquest, by ethnic communities, what it forces people into a new way of thinking is about values and community. And that, bring us back to this concept of, California values or Hawaii values or Alaska values. Maybe Alaska, even more disparate in its communities, might have a harder time creating that identity, but where Hawaii has a very beautiful, distinct cultural identity, more uniform perhaps than California. But in California, you have this conglomerate of Native American, Hispanic, immigrant, Asian immigrant.
The melting pot. We're the melting pot of America. That's why they call us that. The thing is, the Native Americans learned how, even though they were made up, if you say Native Americans, what you're saying is a bazillion different tribes of different Native American peoples. And even within each of those tribes, they had different languages and different cultures and different values. And they still managed to come up with a working government that, they would get together and they would talk things out and they would, come to agreements and compromises. And our government doesn't work that way. The majority always tends to beat down the minority. So it doesn't work. And one of California's values is to make it work for everybody, to come to some compromises. And one of the definitions of compromise is an agreement that nobody is happy with, but somehow it works for everybody. And the other thing I wanted to say is that, I'm sorry, I lost my point in my head somewhere. This is what Poco was just talking about, is simply another facet of what's called mass genocide. Mass genocide is a huge umbrella because these murders are done in many different ways. You can murder people by giving them smallpox infected blankets, and we knowingly did that to some Native American tribes. And actually, we did a lot of that. And another way you can commit
hold
that genocide.
Hold on, Sue. I got to challenge you. I know I'm going to sound like a grammar Nazi here, but who's we? And I want to encourage. I want to ask you to use precise language here. Let's not accept collective historical.
Let's say colonizers then. Let's say colonizers then instead of we. When we first came over, we were colonizers and invaders. And what we did is, one thing we did in order to commit this mass genocide is we took their children from them, the Native American children, we put them in boarding schools, and we told the Native Americans, we're going to do this in order to make your children better people. So we took their children from them and we put them in these really abusive boarding schools, and we disallowed them from using their own languages and practicing their own cultures and spiritual beliefs, and we cut their hair, and we physically, mentally, emotionally abused them in all sorts of ways. And they grew up Americanized, and that was another way we destroyed their culture and their ancient knowledge and spirituality. So that's just another facet of mass genocide. And I think Poca was touching on it a minute ago as he was speaking.
Yeah. Well, I do want to say the we and all those statements really needs to be, and to me this is an important thing, Sue. I don't mean to pick this apart. I know what you're saying. I know who you're referring to, but I think it's really critical that we use honest and precise language here, because that kind of, we say we Americans, we taxpayers, we this, we that, we invaded Iraq, we no, let's ascribe responsibility appropriately. And even in this talk of secession, saying, instead of saying we invaded Iraq. No, the federal government, the U.S. military did that. Just that kind of, appropriate ascribing responsibility in our language. It's like saying cannabis instead of marijuana, right? All right.
Absolutely. The thing is that would not have gotten by if regular Americans had disallowed it. We allowed it because we wanted to thrive here. We wanted more land. So we voted for a government politicians who would give us more land.
Yeah. No, we were if you want to say we the American people as the privileged citizens of the empire have been manipulated by our own wants and desires. So I want to go to Jason now. Jason, we have a bit of competition here to see who goes first, right? Obviously with today's panel we could say between California and Alaska and Hawaii we have, I don't want to say competing because we're obviously collaborative independence movements. In Texas now with Biden is going to experience a public rush of people willing to look behind the mask and see that it's just another mask being worn by the federal government evil institution. So who goes first, Jason? What do you see as the most likely? And obviously here in Gardenia, we've already seceded on my 10 acres. We'll come back to that micronation bottom-up solution strategy. But in terms of like big political dominoes, do you count Brexit? I don't think so. Catalonia, you would. Scotland, you would. There are a number of independence movements around the world. Is America even going to be the ones leading this new wave of freedom? And if so, Hawaii, Alaska, California, Texas, or somebody else first?
Yeah, that's a great question. Personally, I have been keeping apprised on the Scottish independence movement for some years now and have been fully supportive. I personally believe that they will probably be the first ones of all of the current independence movements. I firmly believe that they will be the first ones that we see succeed in seceding. The thing with the American movements, California, Alaska, Hawaii, Texas, I believe Vermont or Delaware as well. There's one of those old colony states is also
Vermont and New
pursuing.
Hampshire have significant independence movements as well.
Okay, yeah. For the American movement, honestly, I think if I had to be as totally unbiased and removed from the Cal-Exit movement as possible, I would say that of all of the claims, of all validity to claim, probably no one more so than Hawaii has a legitimate 100%, you cannot even question it, kind of right to pursue their self-determination.
Right.
That is mainly because, as the representative from Hawaii just, spoke about, they were an independent nation recognized by most of the world. They, all of the things he said about, having a phone in their palace before the White House had a phone. Yep.
Yeah, pretty clear cut.
If the UN had existed, they would be there. They would have probably been the founding member of the UN. So I believe that Hawaii, even more so than my beloved California, has the utmost right to pursue their self-determination. I do notice that of all of the American movements, the California independence movement seems to have the most in numbers of voters supporting it. But that doesn't mean that we are necessarily the most likely to go for it first. If I had to take a stab at it, I would say probably Texas would be first for the American movement, mainly because in Texas, the culture there is much more how you've described of, there's nothing more American than standing up to the man and saying, no, your empire cannot control me and my life.
We're so American, we're Texan. All right, so I want to take this question to the rest of the panel. Let's go JR, Polka, and then back to Sue. Who's first, and what does that mean for the immediate future of global secession?
I would also agree Texas is probably more likely to be the first, because isn't it in their agreement with the United Nations for statehood that they have the right to divide into 5 states anyway? So that was recognized, their sovereignty, I believe. So, and I know that, Texans believe just to get her done and then allow Washington, D.C. to recolonize them, I don't believe.
Well, it's sort of like with every changing of the mask at the federal level, there's a new burst of anti-federal sentiment, and it seems like with every 4-year cycle, with the greater awareness, that reaction gets stronger and stronger, and it's sort of like, now the wheel lands on Biden, and Texas is going to be the most pissed off. Let's see what happens next, right? Okay, so Polka, as an advocate of Hawaiian secession, you think you're going to win this race?
Well, I don't see it as a race. I see that we all move together, and as we move together, we also recognize that there has been a sweep of decolonization across the Pacific, into Asia, in Africa. Look at what happened with the Soviet Union and the breakup and the freeing up of all these other countries. So I see it as a general sweep, and irrespective of whether it's Hawaii, California, Alaska, Texas, or whoever it is, the idea of self-determination is increasing, especially with the new technologies that we have, the new changes in economic systems. But even more important than that, I believe that the issue of values need to be addressed. For us in Hawaii, that is what I believe is the most important movement. It's not the sovereignty movement. It's how do we change the lifestyle and the deep culture of Hawaii. Right now, we in Hawaii, like the rest of you, are being led by deep values or deep culture that is based on 3 fundamental pillars. One is a pillar of domination. The second is a pillar of separation or individualism. And the third is a pillar of exclusion. If you're not with us, you're against us.
Yeah.
There's no grays in between. It's either black or white. It's what I call the deep value or the deep culture of DIE, domination, individualism, and exclusion. And people are getting sick and tired of it. They're saying, no, we cannot treat the environment in this way. We cannot treat economic relationships in this way. We cannot treat the way we do health, the way we do education, and all of these things, the deep value itself, the way government operates, supporting DIE has to change. And so in Hawaii, we are saying, what are the values that it should change to? Now, you can call it California values. I call it in Hawaii, instead of domination, it's being able to relate to one another, even though we have different positions or different systems of belief. We have, like, let's take myself and my family. My wife is an ordained Buddhist minister. My daughter is a Christian minister. And yet I'm all over the place. But we get together as a family. We need not dominate one or the other religion within our family. What I'm saying is that the system of olu olu, that is to be respectful for one another, differences of one another, whether it's in race, whether it's in religion or economic belief systems and all these things, we need to learn to be far more gentle than we have been. Instead of individualism, we learn about lokahi, about working together, about working with groups, about honoring the system of families and groups rather than only the individual and individual rights. And instead of exclusion, it's always including. If somebody is different, we try to bring them in and include them. In the communities, in the outlying areas, we have a new value. It's not a new value, it's a very old value. And we call it Ola. Olu Olu Lokahi and Aloha. And it means life, it means health. As compared to the die value that we have been working under, and the American system supports that die value. And so it's really a change in values that we are looking for. And what we are saying is that you cannot achieve that change under an Americanized system because it's so ingrained that we need to be able to separate. And we have all the historical justifications, the legal justifications, but really what motivates us is we need to change a value system so that we can operate as a people of Hawaii based on those values. So I think we need to start looking more deeply at how do you define California values, Alaskan values, and all of these other things, rather than just we want to get away from that economic system, but not really defining or redefining what your own economic system, or where do you really hope to move to?
Yes. No, and Polka, what you again, you're like the Hawaiian Buddha, man. This, the wisdom, the way that you are able to present these big ideas that shift deeper perspectives, almost on a spiritual level. It's really beautiful. So before we go to Sue for her comments on this question, I got to do a quick sidebar to my fellow libertarians in the audience. And this is so important for us to recognize. If we want to make the world a better place for everyone, we want our values of peace, of respect for human rights, of nonviolence as libertarian values embodied in the world. Maybe we need to stop focusing on issues and outcomes and start focusing on this deeper human value connection. Instead of trying to argue with people about preferences or systems, say, let's just respect our shared humanity. And there are a lot of ways in the past that we have been led to dependency on centralized systems because those who have ruled us have stolen from the people so much that they control resources essential to basic human needs of food, clothing, shelter, medical care, energy, and now access to technology. And we are on the verge of being so prosperous as a species that they can't hold us hostage with that crap anymore. And people feel empowered. Like Sue raised the issue about the economics separation, and Marcus saying, well, we could be fine on our own economically. Well, we are about to be on the verge technologically, productivity-wise, as a global human family of saying we can feed and clothe and take care of everyone on earth many times over. And as a result, we don't need to feel the pressure or give into the pressure to be a part of centralized systems of exploitation. So, Sue, back to you for this bigger question of who's going to win the race, who goes first, Alaska, Hawaii, California, Texas maybe, or some other international incident that might be the first big domino to fall. And what does that mean for the immediate future of the global secession movement?
I think Jason is a lot more qualified to speak to that than I am, so I will throw in with him and say, yeah, Scotland. I think the Scots are going to win the race to independence. I think we have to support each other in our movements towards independence. And I think that a few really, really important things have been said that sort of deserve a little bit of a recap again. The fact that Hawaii was already independent before our military swooped in and took it over and turned it into a U.S. territory or a U.S. state. And let me think. I was also going to mention that me see here, that philosophy that Poca was talking about of working in harmony with others is closely mirrored by the Native American philosophy of being inclusive and working with others, as well as working with the land. And a lot of ills of the world can be dealt with and remedied by doing this, by working with each other and working in harmony with the land, because what we have right now is not really a matter so much of there not being enough food to go around. It's about the distribution process. Our distribution process really sucks. Excuse me for the French. But it's not working, and it's not working because the U.S. is in charge, and the U.S. Is just too big for its britches. For one thing, it creates for a very slow process of getting things done. Bills have to get through Congress, and they're slowing each other down because the two parties don't want to cooperate for anything, because one party always has to come out the winner.
Right.
And
Except for the stuff that their mutual sponsors agree on, like growing the police state and protecting the banks.
But then everything is also image. So they don't want to look like they're cooperating, even when they want to cooperate. So we have to start, as Poke pointed out, living again in harmony with each other and with the land in order to get food moved to where it should be. And Cascadia is one really big group that is project focused, that takes on projects like getting food moved to where it should be, and getting teams built to play soccer together, and just all sorts of things that improve their communities across this giant expanse of a region. They really cover a huge territory, and they are all project based.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go back to Jason here then. If we just lost this video, Jason, you there with audio clear? Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
So, Jason, back to you on the prediction side of this. Say Scotland gets their independence and the sky doesn't fall, and they have a happy process, and it gives maybe we get some conservative backlash to Biden in 4 years, and now California is motivated and it comes on the ballot. How do you see that playing out? What's the timeline? And then the big follow-up question I want to ask for everybody is, what's the cascade effect, the domino effect of that? Does Orange County get to secede from the nation of the Great Republic of California? Wait, no, is it the Independent People's Republic of California with a K? I think that's what you guys are going to do when you go independent, right? Okay. But does Orange County get to secede from California, and kind of what timeline might that happen on?
Well, that is quite the deep question there. So the first part was Scotland, yeah?
Yes. Well, does Scotland motivate California, and how soon? How fast could that happen?
So Scotland has obviously they've the Scottish independence movement as well as Brexit have inspired our movement, the Calexit movement. Brexit being horrible for Scotland and most of the UK, really. It kind of highlights the fact of, inept government, right? And so we took that and played on it with hey, our government is inept too, and causing us to want to leave and get our independence, just like Scotland. Scotland had to kind of wait for Brexit to be finalized before their actual mandate for pursuance of independence could be pursued, really. Now that Brexit is finalized, they have back in December, I believe, was when I was made aware that towards the beginning of this year would be their first vote towards independence. They had that. They've had several other votes. They've they've really been making serious progress. I wholeheartedly believe that sometime within the next 2 years, possibly even before the end of the year, we could see an independent nation of Scotland. As for California, as for Orange County, now, under the UN Entrance Treaty, Article 5, the rules of self-determination, any former nation has the right to pursue self-determination. Orange County wasn't a nation. California was, but Orange County wasn't. So if California pursues independence and becomes independent, then as its own nation, California could decide, hey, we're going to let Orange County be its own territory within our nation, its own.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. I'm sorry to everybody that I missed this possibility that maybe the reason California wants to secede from the United States is so that they can just kick Orange County out from the rest of California.
Well, I mean, Orange County does have a lot. Well, not just Orange County, but the majority of Southern California has a lot of California's population. I think that it would behoove us to keep our southern, because I'm in Northern California right now, so I'll say keeping Southern California friends and family as such is the way to go. Definitely don't want to drive them off.
But you wouldn't stop them, right? I mean, this at least creates the window that if California says, here's the process, we've seceded and it's gone well, you couldn't imagine. I mean, I can't imagine then the state or the Democratic People's Republic of California telling Orange County you can't go through the same process.
Yeah, that kind of comes back to California values, right? In that, how dumb would we be? How foolish would we look? How hypocritical would we be if we do all this and then tell our own people, no, you can't?
Well, we're talking not about the California people telling other people they're doing that. We're talking about government officials telling them you can't do that. And we know from our experience with the federal government that has basically been doing the same thing for 200 plus years. They don't have any institutional shame, right? So I want to go to Poca on this because, in Hawaii, while there is this distinct colonization experience, you also have distinct communities on each island in Hawaii. Is there any sense that those islands would want to separate if Hawaii gained its independence?
I'm sure over a period of time there will be a movement, but not necessarily a separation from a Hawaiian nation. It would be more a structuring of a separation of powers so that the island of, let's say, Kauai or the island of Hawaii or the island of Oahu would have its own autonomy within the greater Hawaiian nation. Mm-hmm. So the question then becomes, who is the self in terms of self-determination? Once you identify the self, all peoples, all selves have the right to exercise determination. In Hawaii, are they separate peoples or just people more clearly defined by geography or by economic interests or by religious beliefs and all that stuff? And to what extent do you allow that kind of separation within a nation? So the nation will have to talk with itself about what is the appropriate degree of separation. And you try within a nation not to have secession. Hawaii's history was that we were a united nation. So it would not be appropriate at this point to talk about the right of one group here or another group there to try to achieve secession. The other point is that we need to be very careful about breaking up into two small units, because if that is the case, you can have a small unit pull away, let's say a native tribe, and say that we want to be separate. And as a result, we're going to take advantage of becoming a sovereign nation and allowing multinational corporations from coming in, major banks from coming in, and others, and then they restructure using the shield of sovereignty to achieve many other things that a company or a corporate entity is not able to claim. So be careful. There are dangers in the separation of two small units. So that's why it's very important to define who is a self, what is the historical, cultural basis to be able to claim that you are a people with the right to self-determination.
Well, that suggests, I mean, what you said about practical autonomy at the local community level within the Hawaiian Islands suggests, again, Hawaiian Buddha is at it today, man. No, I'm just thinking like when you first clue into this issue of secession, whether it's for your community or a state or a former independent nation, you have to ask the question of where does this go from here? And what this represents, if there is an elevation of the concept of secession globally in the human family paradigm, that we say if a group of people who are part of a larger political conglomerate in a peaceful legal process say, we don't want to be a part of this anymore, we recognize their right to independence, that fundamental shift is a fundamental shift towards government going from being coercive to consensual. And what you said there, Poca, about like a Hawaiian, like maybe a tribe in California after California goes independent, do they want it? Is it practical for them? Do they want the burden of organizing sovereignty? But the fact that they have that option means that the state, the now independent, I love just saying the Democratic People's Republic of California with a K, but no, but if you, the state now independent Republic of California has to be nice to them to keep them around as being a part of their, social organization. You could see it as a company, as an organization that wants to serve as many people as possible. There's a sort of, legitimate imperialism of a government that says, we want to be such an awesome government that other groups want to be a part of our conglomerate, but we respect that they do that by choice. And what this gets down to, again, it's the individual relationship with government becomes consensual. And this is more important to achieving a voluntary society than talking about libertarian economic theory or even ethical theory, but taking those principles and making them practical. So I want to give this question to everybody, and this is kind of the bigger one. Having considered secession as an intellectual concept, where do you, if we win this round, if our ideas and principles here I want to say they're already mainstream, they're already sort of inherent to how humans view each other with wanting to connect and love and work and live with each other. But if these ideas become mainstream politically, where does this lead humanity to the next paradigm, the next phase? Maybe in a few generations, maybe a few hundred years, maybe even 1,000 years if you think the progress is going to be that slow. But I would think, on the scale of something like 100 years, you're going to see these ideas play out. Where does that lead us, or where do you want that to lead us? Let's start with Sue.
Yeah, 1,000 years down the line, there are probably going to be a lot more people on this earth. So everybody who's here at that time is going to have to continue to rethink borders and boundaries and types of government. And that's one thing I wanted to mention before, is that once California is separated from the United States, our government will probably look nothing like the US government. Will probably be a much more inclusive and cooperative type governance. and so we have to remember when we write up our documents of governments to speak to people living 1,000 years down the line, to our descendants, and to give them room and remind them to rethink what's going on in terms of governance, and to be free, to feel free to recreate, reimagine, and rebuild, just as we are now reimagining a new type of governance for California. And something that it's a little off topic, but it bears repeating what Jason said and what Polka said. Jason said Orange County wasn't a nation before, so they probably wouldn't really have a clear path to secession. But at the same time, we wouldn't stop in the way the U.S. is sort of trying to prevent us from secession. And Polka was saying something about the islands of Hawaii thinking about individual determination, and doing so in sort of a cooperative manner, as, you know, maybe different people from different islands, or as, you know, similar to the way in which Native American tribes got together and found compromises about who and what would be allowed to happen on different parts of the land. They actually talked to each other and got permission to cross each other's territories. And so we need to be very open-minded about the future for our descendants of California.
All right. Thank you, Sue. JR?
Well, I think it's human nature to reach self-actualization, autonomy. And I think with technology and information explosion, it's allowing us all to have those access to those resources to live the lives that we can envision for ourselves. So it's about people living to their capacity, not someone else telling them what to do, right? So it goes down to the very individual soul, if you will, you know, the essence of being, the core of humanity. Do we need to be treated like a commodity, someone's property, a workplace of, you know, full of robotons, or are we something greater, something more than that? Are we really, you know, spiritual beings living, having a material experience, which is what is happening? And so what does that mean? What are the implications of that? You know, what are the implications of our actions? What are the implications of our abuse of one another? What's the implication of love, right? And peace. So I think the potential exists for a great revolution of the mind and of the polity, if you will, but it's going to be resisted with, you know, by the powers that be. So that's to be expected, because when dinosaurs, the death throes of dinosaurs can be very dangerous. Yes.
All right. I just want to point out, since we've got a little less than 20 minutes left, that we do want to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions of the panel. Get them in the comments. CJ and Jim will be able to get them up on screen here. But before we go to that, let's give Jason and then Polka a chance to close out this bigger question.
Yeah, I think it is kind of pertinent to state and for all of us to remember that the founding fathers of the United States of America, they saw that there was a need for them to decide things for themselves, to control themselves, right? To not be controlled by someone thousands of miles away. They also, in that founding document, made sure to include all sorts of contingencies, because they understood that there is no governmental structure that will last forever. Everything will always eventually be corrupted at some point, be it 250 years, 50 years, 1,000 years from now. No matter when it comes, there will be a time when the people will need to restructure and decide for themselves. That was the founding fathers of the United States of America that said that. So I mean, I identify as a Californian, right? California is still a part of America. I know. So technically, I'm an American. Okay, you got me there. But I would judge
it's California. You can identify as an Apache attack helicopter if you want and pick your own pronouns.
Oh, well then, call me a Hellfire missile. But yeah, no, it seems to me that it would be pertinent for California, should we choose, and not just California, for all people who seek self-determination. Should a people actually achieve it, it will be pertinent to structure loosely. Not too loosely, but not too stringent, right? There's a healthy middle ground to things. We hear Republicans say this too much big government, and then we hear Democrats saying not enough big government. Why can't we have somewhere that's a healthy middle ground? This will leave room for the people of the future to further refine and hone their, political and ruling structure, but it'll also prevent any sort of, for lack of a better term, dictatorship, right? Too stringent of regulation, and anyone in charge, whether they wanted to be a dictator or not, they're gonna be a dictator because their job is to mandate every second of everybody's life. None of us really want that, and we also don't want the exact opposite, where there is absolutely zero structure to anything. There needs to be some rule, some regulation. But again, we have to remember, humans are fallible creatures. We all make mistakes, even myself included. All of us make mistakes. Government structures, very specifically, will at some point start to fail. It's inevitable. And for us, it's all about how are we going to deal with that.
All right, Jason, I want to share a couple of comments before we get to Poga here. Dustin Harris on Facebook wrote, I'm an Alaskan first. Even though I'm Tennessee, he says, dude, I may happen to be American, but I'm forever Alaskan. And Rob B wrote a question that was very directly related to what you said there, Jason, about what is the middle ground. And this is something that creates, for me, jumping into this as a libertarian, it's like, wait, where's the middle ground on coercion? No, there's no middle ground. There's a moral, ethical, absolute. But if I may try to answer the question, and maybe you could put this in your own words, but who determines the middle ground? I would say it's the market for government, the market for social organization, the market of consent, right? And you might want to say, well, that's not the market, but it's the natural human process of consensus, what people want. And I would say that's a market demand for government services or community services, or just what kind of community people want to live in. That's what the balance is. So is that kind of what you mean by that there's a balance?
Yeah, exactly. We see that like half of the United States is on one end of the political spectrum. The other half is over on the other end. One half wants only their way. The other half wants only their way. This is going to lead to nothing getting done. Okay, why can't we take the things that, the Republicans, like I hear, Republican and such say, there's way too high of tax for things not getting done. Like, there are actual issues. If you're going to tax us this much, you better be fixing these things. I totally agree with that. I'm registered green. I totally agree with that. It's find these things that we agree on.
No, believe it or not, conservatives, liberals are also against government fraud, waste, and abuse. Maybe not as upfront and passionately, but yes, they are also against. All right, so before we get to this question, I want to give Poca a chance, at least quickly, to answer this bigger question for you, Poco, what is the ideal society that respect for rights of secession leads humanity to?
Gee, what a question. First, let's go back to the very beginning of this panel and the idea of the right of secession. The United States creates domestic law that says you have no right of secession, and yet it's not contained in the U.S. Constitution. That was decided essentially through the Civil War. And yet another decision was made in the American Revolution, in which the right of secession was reestablished. International community recognizes that all peoples have the right to self-determination, and that is what international law is. So we cannot just say that we cannot secede unless we work it within the domestic legal system of the United States. No, the right to secession is a human right that even if you have to violate the domestic laws of the United States, do so. One of the greatest secession movements was led by a man named Gandhi. It was a peaceful movement, and yet it was outside of the law of England. So he didn't become a criminal and violate the criminal laws. What he did was work outside of the law. So he became an outlaw, working within his ethical system, within his moral system, and moved the society to an independent nation. There was some violence, but the violence occurred as a result of the oppression of the colonizer of England. It's the same way in the United States. The movement by people to simply disobey the law, to work against the oppression by the Americans, that is a right that is yours. It's not a violation of anything. You may be violating domestic laws, but on the international basis, you have the right to do it. Just as the Americans in the earlier days decided that they would secede from the English Union. So I would say that what we need to walk away with is a recognition that we cannot only operate within the American domestic system, but we need to see our rights for independence, for secession as a human right, as a basic right. And so we need to change the picture of the areas of law that we work within. I think I'll stop there. I know time is passing by. Thank you for inviting me.
No, thank you. So we have a couple questions from the audience to get to quick. What will happen? So you've been T-rolled, right, to the panelists. What will happen to the federal government roads if any state gains independence? Let's just pick one panelist. Who wants to talk about my roads? Who's got the infrastructure chops? Anybody? No one wants to talk about my roads. Yeah. Okay, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, I'll use California since I'm in California. Say California regains our nationhood, our sovereignty, our independence. The United States federal government will our current elected officials will they will be the ones in charge. It's not going to be me. It's not going to be Marcus. It wouldn't even be Nancy Pelosi either, because I saw that question earlier. Federal representatives will stay federal, right? They're American. They're American representatives, American employees, and we're not going to try to, force them to, everyone gets the right to choose, right? Like, we're not going to force them to do things. The federal government, however, will be separate, a totally different entity from the government of California. So our government would most likely, if they're smart, they would decide to work with the American government and do things such as, hey, you have military bases here and military personnel here, and we don't want to start World War III, and we're not going to be violent towards your people, but we are declaring our independence, and we don't really want a foreign nation's military here in our land.
Yeah, well, yeah,
So
that gets us to hold on, Jason.
polite-
That gets us to our next question from Craig in the Producers Club, who writes, how would the states deal with U.S. bases on their new states as independent nations? And it's funny that you say that California would reject U.S. military bases. Like, we don't want a foreign military to be stationed here. I imagine guard bases would become, or guard facilities would become, the foundation of the new sovereign California military. But you can't just say, well, we're going to secede and kick your bases out, because the United States military has bases in all sorts of foreign sovereign nations. 160,000 troops approximately currently posted all over the world. But maybe we'll let our other three panelists take this question very quickly. Sue, JR, Polka, California and U.S. military bases, and then Alaska and Hawaii. Sue?
If I may, real quick, just to finish the point that I was making, what I was going to say is there is a polite and reasonable way that the current California government could choose to work with the United States government to achieve these ends without there being all sorts of chaos and havoc.
Couple of other points here that I wanted to make. The U.S. war machine would slow down quite a lot for lack of California funding, and it may even come to a screeching halt. Just don't really know about that myself, but I have heard that from a lot of experts in the movement.
Hold on, Sue, I've never heard that before. That's a beautiful possibility, and I would like to say, as someone who is as anti-militarism as it gets, it's worth pointing out that the militarism we live under depends on the stability of this political conglomerate, and the tax revenue from a state like California going away. It would at very least force massive reorganization, if not, in a sense, pull the plug on the American war machine. That's a beautiful possibility.
Right. I also wanted to mention that unfettered by U.S. policy, our trade would improve, and that would benefit the rest of the world, because we have 11 ports of trade here that I know of in California, and there are a lot of points at which we don't have the right to tax or tariff our own input and output through those ports of trade. Once we have the right to set our own taxes and tariffs on things like that, and on gas, we would have more money to start putting into California education and housing, and a lot of people here in California would benefit from that, and a lot of people outside California would benefit from the trade that would go through California, and from the asylum seekers who would also go through California to other places once they've been nationalized here in California. Okay, I yield the floor.
No, that's beautiful, Sue. I gotta tease you a little bit on this, because you want to take California's ports and liberate them from federal taxes and regulations to increase commerce. You're starting to sound like a capitalist here. Now, obviously, I'm kidding, but no, you're right to point out that the economic autonomy of the ports in particular would be huge for California, huge for the world, and California values allowing the state to be even more of a melting pot in a way that the federal government is restrictive of right now would be huge. Great answer. JR, Alaska. Sorry, final thought there, Sue? Is the mic off?
Sorry, your question asked me to address what would be good about California secession for the rest of the world. And once we have that behind us, we will be able to, within California borders, do anything we want in terms of capitalism or create another system besides capitalism for within the borders of California, and people could come back in with their US dollars and trade them for something Californian in terms of barter and trade, or California dollars, or the yen, because California might even take up with China and take up the yen or the euro or whatever it is. You know, that's in the future. Nobody can see what's going to go on there, but we have some ideas within the movement.
Yes, no, locally based community value systems yeah, I mean, it sounds like sounds like capitalism to me, when you get people coming together by choice to interact how they want based on their values and create systems, whether you call it communism or socialism or whatever the heck you want. If it's voluntary and ethical, I say you have the right to do it. JR, specifically Alaska, U.S. military bases.
So, well, the Alaska, there's something called the Alaska Defense Forces, and that was set up during the territorial times, and that's under the control of the governor. So that could become the beginning of the Alaska military. And Alaska, as a sovereign nation, could enter into agreements to lease bases to the United States if they wanted to, or maybe Canada, or even Russia if they wanted to. So, you know, it's like thinking outside the box. You have to stay within the American defense perimeter or NATO, or are there other options? But certainly it would devolve to the locals, and the citizens would have much greater responsibility for their own defenses in Alaska or the other state.
Sounds like Alaska might be more ready for that. Although, you know, you do have some nice geographical boundaries to invasion, as well as the weather that tends to keep people away. All right, enough about
the states get to keep their nukes, though. That's the question, right?
Right. Oh man, that. All right. For the follow-up panel that we'll be doing on Secession in a month, our next installment in this series, we will be covering the dissolution of the nuclear military empire through secession. Now, Polka, and I know we're over time, so last question here, and then we'll give everybody the last word to wrap up. But Polka, you pointed out that the U.S. military is a major part of Hawaii's economy, and when you understand the fundamentals of that beyond, oh my gosh, they bring money in tourism and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, they take money from you that could go to meet human needs and instead turn it into guns and violence and military bases, and then, you know, force that on you. So Hawaii militarily, U.S. bases, what do you think would happen?
I think we would have to redefine what national security really means for Hawaii. And I think we would reject the approach that the Americans take in terms of national security, which is a defensive force, which is really not defensive, but it's an aggressive force which pretends to be defensive. Yeah. Hawaii needs to rethink what is national security for us, and how can we use a military for the purposes of providing for the security of Hawaii itself, not to go outside and try to conquer other people. So one of the principles I would suggest is that we get rid of all nuclear weapons. Doing that, we would have other foreign countries which now have nuclear weapons pointed at Hawaii because they are looking at the United States. They will begin to point their weapons in other places. We would have free verification that we have no nuclear weapons, and we would invite people to come in. And then we would start replacing the military with our educational systems, creating international educational institutions. We would take back the amount of lands that the American military have taken. Imagine that, 1/3 of all of Hawaii lands coming back to Hawaii. We are now able to control our own trade, our international relations. All of these things switches around. So we don't just concentrate on what the American military brings in, but we look at all the other potential to establish a secure, economically secure place here in Hawaii. So it's a rethinking of national security and the meaning for it.
No, I mean, the simple idea of secession really does force the examination of all of these deeper issues. And I just want to acknowledge very quickly another quick question from our Producers Club. Stephen McClure writes, how will the idea of secession mitigate or eliminate state-based violence? And I think we've covered that more than enough and shown a lot of ways that violence and the coercion and the evil that people of all different ideologies agree on are inhumane, are practically eliminated if secession is taken to its conclusion or logical conclusion or the complete implications of this are realized. So, all right, last words. I know that we are over time. I'm so grateful for our panelists joining us. So let's just go as I see you on screen, left to right, Jason, Sue, Polka, and JR to close us out. Anything you want to plug and final thoughts, please.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you. This has been an awesome panel. I could personally keep going for another couple hours.
Yeah.
My closing thoughts would be this, that we have problems that we cannot fix under our current political structuring, our current government structuring. The only way that we really can address our issues, our real issues that we really do have, and fix them, is to pursue independence, to claim our independence, and to fix our problems for ourselves. Because every time we've tried, we get stopped up and told that we can't do that. So if there's no one to tell us we can't do it, then the only thing that's going to stop us from doing it is whether or not we actually go and do it.
Well said. Thank you very much for joining us, Jason. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Wright with the Calexit Congress. Sue Hirsch, your final thoughts, please.
Absolutely what Jason said. We can't fix this any other way. It's broken. We have irreparable differences with the U.S. and staying or anyone telling us to stay is equivalent to someone telling a battered spouse to stay in their horrible, horrible marriage. Also, about that security question, I wanted to address it with 2 points. One is that nobody is going to want to aim their weapons at us because a lot of them are invested here, and you don't aim weapons at somewhere where you're heavily invested that's making you money. Also, as Matt Owen once pointed out to me, California weapons are very mobile, and the rest of the world would kind of just never know where they are. We could put them on a truck and move them across the state from point A to point B anywhere, and they'd never know where those weapons were pointed. But we want to be more like Switzerland. We want to be a point where people come to. We want to be the hub of trade and tourism, as we always have been. Because that is beautiful stuff that draws people in and gets tourism dollars spent here.
Beautiful, Sue. Sorry.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was an honor to meet every single one of you, whether I'm meeting you for the first time or again. I was very honored and privileged to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Sue. All right. Hawaiian Buddha, your closing thoughts, sir.
I join in thanks for allowing me to participate with you folks. I would suggest that in this discussion, we have talked about what seems to be absolutes, secession or remaining part of the United States. But there are many grays and many in-betweens between those processes. And I think the process is important rather than looking at the end result. How do we carry on the conversation? How do we develop structures of government to carry out the changing circumstances of the people as we move forward and eventually hopefully reach the end result of secession? And maybe secession may not be the right place to go. Let us think about other structures of government, such as a condominium relationship, one in which there is divided authority within a particular geographic area, so that those in California who want to remain part of the United States and participate there and pay their taxes are separated from the people in California who are saying, well, we are Californians and we are not Americans, and so we are restructuring our government. The ideas of possibility is really open, and so we should not see things in black and white, but we should learn to see the grays in between as we move from our, or hopefully our, final destination. And as we move, it may not be the best place to be, but we would enjoy a condominium relationship, a right of some Californians or some aspect of California to trade internationally, to develop their international relations, their own economies, etc., etc. So open up the possibility and see all of the possibilities that California can get into, or any of us can get into. Thank you again very much for allowing me to participate. Aloha.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much, sir. And you know, that reminds me of this bigger idea again of secession. It's not just demanding a specific political outcome, but it is a greater call for government to be consensual, to be by consent. And only good can come of that because we are directly confronting the coercive injustices of government. So, JR, you get the last word of last words for our panel today. Your thoughts, please.
Thank you, Adam. I agree with what you just said, and I would much rather exchange words than bullets or bombs. And so a lot of people are afraid to even talk about secession. Just discussing it doesn't mean that you're advocating it necessarily. You're just advocating the concept of what's possible, you know, and that's how this nation was founded. And so that's what we're trying to do in the Life and Liberty Party, is just to promote those ideas, you know, accountable government, decentralized government, personal autonomy, you know, the rule of law, you know, enshrining these basic values of humanity, not, you know, government accountability of our government, not leaders, but servants, you know, just putting things back into perspective. Since when was it our destiny of man to become the chattel of a, you know, self-selected tiny elite that they feel that they can do whatever they wish with us? That's not our destiny, and that can't be allowed to happen. So in order to combat that, we have to self-actualize, I guess is the word, you know, take it upon ourselves to make this life what we want it to be. Freedom begins in the mind. Secession begins with self-autonomy in your head and in your heart.
Oh man, I can't think of a better way to close this out. Thank you so much, JR. Greatly appreciate it. Man, this has been a lot of fun. What a wonderful conversation about secession today. There we have the CalExit website up again. We're going to have all the links for our guests and the notes for today's show. But let's get CJ up here, our executive producer. Man, was that we got to do a series on this now. Like, this concept of secession, I mean, we can cover it narrowly in immediate political causes, but it's so much bigger than that. I could do a panel on a secession themed panel once a month here.
Once a month? I mean, it's how do we abolish the federal government? By seceding one state at a time, removing one star from the flag at a time, make them change their flag every time a state removes themselves from the union.
If that's what it takes. I also think that there's a possibility that when California is on the verge of secession, and enough other nations have been formed around the world successfully with the Scottish all the different independence movements, that it might lead the United States. Wait, if we let one state go, it's going to be a lot trickier than if we just get rid of the Fed entirely. And I don't know where this goes. There are a lot of different possibilities. It's too early in the, I guess you could say, the development. I mean, we're in the maybe early adolescence of the modern secession movement, if you will. You know, you want to oppose some model like that. But yeah, this is, CJ, I mean, there's so many other ways we could go with this. We got to do a panel on micronations. That might be, you know, in the general theme of secession. We could do one that's, you know, focused on the political, the administrative, the process. There's so much more to this. But I think that basic understanding that this is a call to challenge government to be consensual. Oh,
Right.
you say you're by consent of the governed? Are you really? Let's find out.
I missed this comment. I wanted to throw it up. Will California have a space force? But I felt like we didn't have time for that one. Again, good comment. We can save that.
California. No, the question, will California have a space force? The answer is, if California and Florida secede, they are going to take the space force with them in equal halves, and then the rest, then nobody gets a space force.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, just excellent panel. I learned a lot. I thought that each of them had something to bring to the table in the discussion of secession. And, you know, when I ran for governor, I said I would abolish the state government known as South Dakota and give it back to the Native American people here. And that wasn't as popular amongst statists, but it was still a question of whether or not the government has enacted its treaties and the obligations to those treaties. And the answer to me was no. So they default on their treaties and therefore lose the fiduciary responsibilities of those treaties, therefore losing land rights. And I think I put it up earlier that California is over like 40% federal land, Alaska over 40% federal land, Hawaii over a third federal land. It's pretty crazy when you look at that by comparison to states on the East Coast and states that are further east. It's not as much land mass controlled federally. So I thought that was a little misrepresentation of federal government as well. So yeah, just a great panel. Can't wait to have them back and maybe discuss a few more topics. Hey, real quick, Jim's not doing comments here in the last half hour, and I am not comment Jim Freedom, but some of you in the comments, you know, you'll have your own conversations. That's great, but you know, questions. We need questions when we ask for questions, not statements like these are all communists. I mean, we need actual questions, please.
We've been feeding the trolls this week. Their appetites are worked up. But do we have a contest winner? Is there someone you want to pick for the best comment promoting secession? Or
well, I can't go back too far. Herman Rifida did have a $2 super chat, but I can't scroll back, so thank you for that. I cannot remember what was posted, but if you type it in tomorrow, we'll make sure to get it in there. You don't got to pay $2 again, but we do appreciate it. And,
yeah, thank you to Hiram Bifidum, one of our regular super chatters. We noticed and we appreciate it.
Absolutely. And so, again, I don't see a comment winner necessarily. We like to set our bar really high. Like, you gotta make us notice you and then take over that comment with the show, just giving us some incredible thoughts. So, unfortunately, nobody wins today, but you can always try again tomorrow. If not, you can always go to adamversustheman.com, where you can click on our Patreon link. Our Patreon is where you can help support by giving us $1, $5, or $10 a month. $10 is really where it's at, because that gets you access into our private Telegram chat, as Jim told you earlier. It is a 24/7 group that just shares content, personal stories. I mean, it's really like our Freedom family, everybody that's in there. So we want to make sure that if you are supporting us financially, that we're giving you an outlet that we monitor 24/7, unless, of course, we're sleeping. But somebody like me who gets up at 2:33 in the morning, I check sometimes, see where the stories are. And it's really just a great way to support. If you want to continue this conversation outside of the comments over on social media, you can go to t.me/Adam versus the man. It is a public Telegram channel where you can comment. We'll see it. Join the group. You can still share content. You share videos. It's a lot better of a messaging service and data transferring service than any of the other social media sites. So again, t.me/Adam versus the man. And then after you do that, you can help support us by going to the store, where our Producers Club and Better Patrons members get 15% off and free shipping. And I'm hoping to get those Do You Even Freedom, Do You Even Jim Freedom, bro, shirts up here soon enough. And so those will be pretty awesome to have and see. And again, take a picture of yourself with some of the merch. I know Adam would not mind putting it out on his Twitter if you're, you know, showing us that you support the show by purchasing our merchandise. And then after that, you get to go over to Cigar Federation and enjoy yourself a cigar, where promo code Adam, ADAM, whoop, wrong button. man, you got to be in that spot. Adam, ADAM10, all caps, gets you 10% off your order. And again, the JSK Nugs are Adam's favorite. That is a CBD infused cigar. And too bad you're not doing cigars and sunsets anymore. That was maybe that should be a summer thing. I might be a little too cold in Gardenia today to do that, but it's been a while since you've done that. And then, of course, as always, we'll close out with the Garden of Freedom over on Instagram, where you can see all the cool little photos in Gardenia and what's going on. And I know Adam likes to share little regular content over there and let everybody know what's happening over in the Garden of Freedom. And, you know, that's kind of where you're going to be able to watch the Gardenia Sovereignty Project as Adam is declaring himself a micronation. There was a few comments in there that was kind of questioning, some of the statements of the panelists were, well, how small is too small? Well, is 10 acres in the mountains of Arizona too small? I don't know. We should maybe ask that next time.
Well, I think Polka had a great answer to that when I asked about would other Hawaiian islands become independent nations, and it's if you have this is where there's a market balance in government services. If you're on one island, you share a culture and you want to be a part of a bigger community called Hawaii, and you choose to be a part of it. If you have the autonomy that you want, why not be part of that bigger system? If it's a voluntary system, if it's really a sort of republic of individuals or communities where your autonomy is essentially respected at all times, why not? And I think what this might lead to, we talk about that leading to secession. It might lead to bigger governments territorially in the long run, but then they're all voluntary, and there's an absolute level of ethical adherence to the non-aggression principle. And it's voluntary for every individual, and it's completely consensual, and that's where this is going. So, CJ, if you don't mind, I want to close out, unless you have any other producer notes here. I want to close out with a Captain America quote. And it might sound kind of corny, but in this context, talking about sovereignty, talking about secession, talking about independence, and I got to say, I was truly pleasantly surprised, especially with Hawaiian Buddha. But with all the ways that the conversation that we just had with that panel led us to those deeper principles and a greater understanding of what's behind this call for secession. And even though we go, well, yeah, the majority's not on our side yet, that doesn't stop us. And there is a fundamental principle that for me as a libertarian but as a human, it's not about the outcomes. It's not about the systems. It's not about the labels. It's about the ethics. Does it reflect the love in our hearts for our fellow human beings? Do we create systems that respect each other, that are consensual? Or do we force people into systems driven by fear and insecurity and greed rather than love? And there is a fundamental truth that we are illuminating with this conversation, which is that government, as we know it today, is not consensual. It's coercive. It violates your rights as an individual, as communities, as the whole human family, to live, to flourish, to love each other, to associate freely, interact, exchange freely, to exercise our rights without impediment. And exposing that truth is so important that I can only turn to the words of Captain America to describe it. Doesn't matter what the press says. Doesn't matter what the politicians or the mob say. Doesn't matter if the whole country decides that something wrong is something right. This nation was founded on one principle above all else: the requirement that we stand up for what we believe, no matter the odds or the consequences. When the mob and the press and the whole world tell you to move, your job is to plant yourself like a tree beside the river of truth and tell the whole world, no, you move. And with that, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Mwah. Peace and love, y'all. Choose happiness. Be excellent to each other.